Hi, my name is Kimberly Valdez. Welcome to the Life as a Therapist podcast. My guest today is Kayla Tiller, and we're talking about becoming a mom as a therapist. Kayla, I'm so excited to have you here today. Um, we have known each other for a little bit. Tell everyone what they need to know about you.
Oh gosh. Okay. So my name's Kayla, as you so greatly introduced me, Kimberly. I have been what I call, a therapist for a little bit about a amount of time
Hmm.
in official title and licensure. But I've been in the mental health field since probably 2014. So
Hmm.
that's ranged from mainly inpatient mental health to crisis mental health, and then also some volunteer work with first responders, secondary trauma, and just trying to avoid PTSD in those realms.
So I'm going to pause you for a second
Yeah.
because you've been in this field for 10 years.
Yes.
Your fancy title has changed more recently, but you have been doing therapeutic work with the LMSW license for a very long time. And then you just got your full licensure here in this last year and have been really thriving as a therapist.
Not only at the LMSW level, but
Mhm.
I became an LBSW during my time when I was doing crisis work with mental health deputies, which was an experience that I absolutely cherish and loved. But yeah, I've been in the field for quite some time in Beaumont area, Texas, and that is just an area that's near and dear to me because I grew up here and
Mhm.
love this area, and I understand what this area has as far as mental health concerns and their needs.
Yeah, it is a place where your expertise and your compassion are very much needed. I would love for you to tell everyone what you're doing now.
So now I have a lengthy title, but it's manager of psych program services at one of the only inpatient facilities in my area. And and my side hustle, as I like to call it, is I work for Kimberly with Nurture Nature Therapy Center, and I see clients in the evenings after I get off of my day job. And that has been just a wonderful experience that has enriched both of my roles. So I'm happy to be in both of those.
Okay. So you have a full-time job, you're doing more therapy on the side. You also have a daughter. Tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about Briar.
So Briar Grace is wonderful. She is 4 years old. She is absolutely full of all the preschool energy that a 4-year-old brings. But as we'll talk a little bit in this episode today, that was not her experience, my husband's experience when she was first born.
Mhm.
And, now I get to look back at that and have an opportunity to talk about it today. But she is just absolutely precious. Um, but I'll be honest with you, becoming a mom to her kind of kicked my butt
Mhm.
and provided an experience that I think a lot of individuals share. And as much as that might be a very vulnerable place for me to talk about today, I think it needs a space, and I'm happy to encourage that space.
Good. Well, tell us, so Briar is 4 now.
Mhm.
What was your journey to becoming a mother in the first place?
Well, my husband Adam and I got got pregnant without thinking about it. I joke about now.
Mhm.
We're like, okay, we want to become pregnant on a Tuesday, and then by Thursday we were pregnant. But anywho's, um, I say that to
The
say,
really lucky, wonderful part of this
yeah,
experience.
yes.
Yeah.
I say that because we weren't someone that had to navigate infertility in that
Mhm.
moment, um, which I'm so thankful for because I generally am like, if that would have compounded with our other experience, I don't know where we would be, to be completely honest.
Absolutely.
Very mindful of that. the impact that trauma can have, especially when it's one traumatic event after another.
Mhm.
Um, so we had a, normal pregnancy. I say normal pregnancy. So I got pregnant in 2019 and then had Briar in 2020. So this was all amidst the challenges of COVID. So like
Mhm.
we went from like, okay, Adam's going to every appointment with me to, oh, no one can come to your prenatal appointments at all anymore.
Mhm.
And you must go to those appointments yourself.
And what
Um,
month was she born in?
July of 2020.
Oh my goodness. So all of your end of pregnancy appointments, were all of those alone, or did Adam get to come to any of them?
He got to come to some, but completely different. Like, to me, there was something about a mask that just made everything so less personal and less connection oriented, right? Like, which I don't think any of us anticipated. But I feel like that was my experience. So yeah, that got completely changed towards the end of my pregnancy.
Mhm. How are you feeling during pregnancy, especially having one, not expecting to be able to get pregnant so quickly, and all of a sudden you're, okay, I guess we are going to be parents.
Mhm.
Then halfway through your pregnancy, we're in a global pandemic. What were you feeling?
Well, I think one of the things that sticks out to me the most is, the whole, traditional baby shower concept completely got obliterated, right? So we had a Facebook baby shower situation. Um, and that was not, you know, the best for everybody because, we have a great village that we're able to raise Briar in. And, it took away a lot of joy in that experience. And it became more isolated by nature of just the reality of what was going on. People are worried about keeping each other safe, everyone not getting sick. But then here we are, we're like, we want to have our baby shower and our punch with like 50 relatives. And
Yeah, this
that's not
beautiful these beautiful moments that you imagined being a part of becoming a parent, then you can still make do, but it's completely different than what you were expecting.
absolutely. So looking back now, I'm like, oh well, maybe that was the indicator of like, hey, this is going to be different than what is in your mind.
Mhm.
But at the time, we did not know that at all. So
Yeah. Yeah, you're just going through like, all right, this is our big challenge. We're
yeah,
having to have a COVID baby.
yeah, okay, like this is what we're gonna do. Yeah.
So she was born in July. What was that like for you going through the process of giving birth?
Um, Pretty good, pretty I say uncomplicated. But it's just me and my husband doing this thing because no one else is allowed to be at the hospital. Um, which, I have a very involved mom. My mother-in-law is very involved still, and uh, none of them were able to be there. As far as Briar's birth, um, when she was born, she had some breathing difficulties. And
Mm.
so I'll never forget, you know, anyone that's ever been a mom and specifically has gotten an epidural when they become a mother and are giving
Mhm.
birth, understands that experience of like, hey, I've just given birth, but I can't feel my legs. And so that means I can't do anything like I would want to do something, right? And I'll never forget my phone being taken with my husband to Briar's NICU situation, and I'm sitting in the bed I just gave birth in, and I have this sandwich, right? The sandwich that you get after you give birth. Or that's the hospital gave me a sandwich. I also think that was a COVID situation. I feel like usually the meal's better, but I digress.
Yeah,
Um,
I was like, I I am so sorry, Kaylee. You didn't get to order whatever the heck you wanted?
I remember it was a sandwich in this little plastic container, and like I don't even want that. And then everybody's hospital is different. They roll in with the breast pump and they're like, "Hey, you need to do the whole breastfeeding situation." Still can't feel my legs. And then Adam has my cell phone. And so this beautiful baby that I've just given birth to is not even within my reach. And they're like, "Oh, well, you gotta get cleaned up, you gotta feel your legs and whatever." And I remember telling Adam, like, if someone does not help me get to NICU, like, I'm going to zombie crawl. I don't care if I can't feel my legs, to get to this NICU so I can be with this baby that I don't even know, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with her. Um,
Yeah, for 9 months, you have never been apart from her. She's always been a part of your body. And then the
yes,
moment she comes into this world, she's in a different section of the hospital and you can't get to her. It's just
yeah,
such a helpless feeling.
yes, absolutely. Um, you know, I remember there being a couple moments that were not ideal in the time that we were there. It was very emotional. I mean, you're very emotional after you give birth to a child. Um, but I was incredibly, I wasn't sleeping. We were struggling with feeding in the NICU, struggling with feeding in the NICU, struggling with, you know, oxygen status staying where it needed to be in the NICU. Um, and then all the while also trying to hopefully not have an extended NICU stay so that everything can iron out and we can go home with our baby,
Yeah.
right? Because this whole experience is compounded, I think, by our family is just chomping at the bits wanting to meet this baby as well, and they can't come up to the hospital to see this baby or us.
Yeah.
um so, you know, have like a 3-day NICU stay. We end up going home by 4th of July. Um, we come home and, you know, everybody's at our house to meet the baby, like our close, immediate family.
Okay.
And so we do that. But I remember there being one experience in the hospital that comes back to me because, you know, it is COVID. And we had this nurse that was just, you know, probably just being herself, but it did not sit well at the time. And uh, I had not been able to pump or anything because, you know, I'm running back and forth between my room and the NICU, and my milk hadn't come in yet. So,
Mhm.
because I had this vision of myself like breastfeeding, right? Like that's what I wanted to do, or at least try for a little while.
Yeah. Well, and you don't really realize, especially when you're a first-time mom, just how long it can take for your milk to come in.
Yes.
I feel like we are vastly underprepared for that. And then you feel ooh, inadequate because
Yes.
you can't feed your baby in the way that you need to, and the way
No.
you feel like I'm supposed to be able to do this. Why is it not working?
Right. Well, and this nurse, I'll never forget, like, sorry if this is too much information, but I'm in, you know, there's things that happen after you give birth to a baby. You're in the bathroom, you're cleaning up yourself, and, you know, then you still have, you're wearing a diaper and your child's wearing a diaper when you're a
Hmm.
mom. Okay. There's that. And so I'm doing that whole experience, and there's a nurse in the room. Briar's in the room at this point, and so is my husband. And at this point, Briar was receiving donor breast milk. Thankful for whoever donated that breast milk that Briar was able to have in her hospital stay. Um, and the nurse comes in and is like, "Well, you're being discharged. Like, what are you going to do at home?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess I'll get some formula if my milk doesn't come in." Like, still waiting for the milk train to start happening. And she says, "Well, if you can find any, because it's COVID, right?" And we're panic buying all the formula. Um, and I remember just I became really angry and was like, I just wanted to like lash out so bad, like, well, what are my other options? Like,
Yeah.
again, no one prepared us for this. No one had that conversation with us. And even if we went through all the best prenatal classes and doing all the things like we were supposed to do, which we couldn't because it was COVID, um, that would not have come up on the 2020 bingo card at all.
No, of course not.
No. Um, so we did go home, we did find formula. And then that's really where I feel like the next, you know, 4 weeks completely changed. And our normal experience really turned very not normal, honestly, slowly and painfully. for quite some time until we kind of knew what was going on.
Yeah. Well, I wanna hear that part of the story next. First, I want to pause you and go back to your hospital stay and your experience there. And when you work with clients who are having a baby, especially for the first time now, what do you want them to know? What do you wish you could make sure that they have based on your experience just of the giving birth piece of it?
Oh gosh. Well, I think Kimberly did a really good job highlighting the fact that even though I haven't been a therapist in title, I've been doing therapeutic work for a long time. And one of the things I have always been very passionate about is being an advocate for individuals that don't have a voice. But I think the more I get into my therapeutic work is anybody has the opportunity for their voice to be turned down or for
Mhm.
them to feel like they lose their voice. So looking back at my experience and what I would tell somebody else in a similar experience or just getting ready to give birth in general is to understand what it means to advocate for yourself in that experience. Um, to know what you want, but also to maintain some flexibility because we know in our therapeutic work that if you're super rigid, that can be a risk in itself. Um, but being open to changing course if you have to for safety reasons for yourself, your baby, um, just maybe whatever your family looks like. Um, but to know what your voice is, like that. There's another experience where I heard a nurse come by my room and I was walking down the hallway and they're like, we can never find this mom. Where is she? She's never in her room. And I'll never forget. I'm like, I think I'm in like one of those, cutesy postpartum gowns that wasn't cutesy because I've already worn it 2 days in a row. And
It's just
whipping
hanging
around.
off of you like
Yes.
dirty,
Yes. We'll
gross.
probably throw up on it, whatever.
Mhm.
And so I whip around and I'm like, well, I'm back and forth to the NICU because that's where my baby is. Like, I remember just being so mad. Like, how do you not know? I mean, it can't be that hard. I didn't run away. Like, I'm in the NICU because that's where my child is.
Yeah. And to overhear somebody thinking something negative
Mhm.
about you because of an experience that you didn't ask for.
Right. And I had overheard, how they do like handoff of care and report. And this was one of my favorite nurses in that experience, but I heard her say the oncoming nurse, like, just be careful. She's very emotional. And I was like, well, hell yeah, I'm very emotional. But then also beginning to like probably gaslight myself looking back at it, like, am I supposed to be this emotional? Are other moms just taking this in stride? And
Yeah.
am I destroying the baseline here? Like, what's going on?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wild. I think one of the first lessons that you learn when you become a parent, especially the birthing parent or the mother in this situation, just that the judgment begins immediately. Really, the
Mhm.
judgment begins in pregnancy.
Oh,
But
100%.
the uptick happens immediately after you give birth. And sometimes other other women are the people who can judge you the hardest, likely because we feel the extremeness of that judgment ourselves, and
Yeah.
we can judge to be able to feel like we have some level of control over our own experiences. But it feels like garbage.
Oh, yeah. Complete garbage. Complete garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. So you really want other people to know in those situations, you do have a voice,
Always.
and people around you, even your care team, might say weird things or make you
Mhm.
feel like something is wrong with you, but that doesn't mean that there is. You can be having a really normal response to an extreme situation of giving birth in a pandemic, your baby going straight into the NICU,
Mhm.
and all while you're becoming a mom for the first time, and you're there is no right response in that situation.
No. And you don't have to, I am someone who naturally is like, let me try to do the right thing. I'm naturally you know, reflective on different things. It doesn't mean I make all the right decisions all the time. No one does. We're human. Um, but that's something that's important to me. So I think, especially for that someone with that kind of temperament, they are slow to speak up for themselves. And I think in that, if you're able, you're getting ready for childbirth or you're about to have children, you're adopting a child, whatever it is, and you do have the privilege or, support of a supportive partner to kind of have that conversation before of like, hey, I'm concerned I might lose my voice in this, and can you help me make sure that doesn't happen? Like a
Yeah.
like a childbirth safety plan, if you will, or anything. I mean, any big life experience. I think now if I would have known what I know now, I would have said like, okay, on we're going to put it on the calendar. We're going to have this conversation because I don't want this to get lost in the unknown of what we're about to experience together.
Yeah. I think that that is where, one, that's why people with the means and ability to do so use doulas because
Yeah.
they're able to be that outside voice. But I also think that this is where this double judgment comes in for people giving birth is that you're cognizant, you're there, you're thought to be not in too much distress because you're giving giving life. And the baby feels more like the patient than the parent does. But the reality is that you are just as much a patient. You're the primary patient, especially before that baby comes out of you.
Yeah.
But um, we aren't always thought of in that way, even from ourselves,
Yeah.
because we feel like we should be able to have control, but you're going through extreme pain, worry, distress. You can be having negative physical consequences to your own body in that process.
Hmm.
And we do need to be able to have a support person who can speak up for us, whether that be a doula or a partner or a family member. And yeah, having a not a set in stone birth plan because again, as we talked about, thinking that things are going to be a certain way can
Yeah.
actually exacerbate um, a negative experience to make it feel more traumatic.
Hmm.
But wait, to know the plan of how you're going to need support in different moments and to have somebody by your side who can help you with that is invaluable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, but you didn't know that
No.
completely going in. That's
No.
what we think, oh, I've got this. I'm good. And Adam is
Yeah.
such a wonderful, supportive partner, but he's never been through this before either.
Nope. And that'll, I did, you know, tell my husband, and make sure it's okay for us, because this experience isn't just my experience, it's his experience too.
Mhm.
Um, because there's nuances to our story that I think are very much just in the vein of like, hey, first responders don't take care of themselves the best all the time. Those that take care of other people don't take care of themselves the best all the time. Um, and my goodness, there's so much needs to be a space for how that doesn't have to be the experience.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the next part of your journey, which is the much more complicated part.
Yeah, complicated to say the least. It was, you know, I think I do things in like I'm gonna do it and we're gonna figure it out. And I very much relate to someone who can have that rigid outlook of like it's just gonna work and not account for when it doesn't.
Yeah.
Um, so, we have this beautiful baby at home and I am trying to breastfeed her and she continues to not be able to latch like she needs to. So I'm still in this um, expectation of myself to really want to breastfeed, whatever. do all that. Now looking back, I'm like, now all she eats is chicken nuggets, so it doesn't even matter what I did then. But at then I was like, well, then I'll just exclusively pump, right? Like that's what I'll do. So fairly quickly, once we got home, the feeding difficulties got really, really significant. So she would take probably about 40 to 45 minutes to drink about 2 ounces of breast milk. So, if you know anything about the postpartum period and typical pumping times,
Hmm.
you can very quickly calculate that if the newborn, beautiful baby is taking about 45 minutes to 50 minutes to drink 2 ounces of breast milk, and mom continues to have to exclusively pump, the time gets eaten up pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that whole experience probably lasted about 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Um,
What
I-
I'm gonna
yeah,
pause you right there because I
yeah.
had a similar experience with my first where it took a little bit longer for my milk to come in. He had lost too much weight.
Mhm,
Um, we were freaking out, but he also took a long time to eat, but was woke up about every hour and a half. And
mhm,
so it was feeding for only 30 minutes, luckily, pumping for 15 minutes, trying to sleep for 45 minutes
mhm.
before we woke up and started the whole process all over again. Um, so I'm thinking about this of like, oh, okay, what was your timeline? What were your stats here?
Right? Um, so that just, picture all of that. And in this process, we're going back and forth to the pediatrician at the time, just really trying to figure out what's the feeding issue here. Briar's like like your experience, not gaining weight, not doing things. My mom and she's probably gonna bawl when she hears this podcast, but my mom didn't tell me this till years later, but she remembers holding Briar and having this feeling of like, I don't know if I need to get attached to this baby because she knew something was not okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
whereas
for
at the
some people, those feeding difficulties can just be a normal part of motherhood, but for y'all, that was an indicator that there was something more going on with her.
Absolutely. Um, so we continue to have feeding difficulties. I'm continuing to be exhausted. My husband is a champ and he's feeding. And Briar also didn't want to, she just was not a good sleeper. She didn't get settled. She was looking back chronically hungry and starving.
Yeah.
Um, and not necessarily for breast milk place, but for different reasons that we'll talk about. Um, but I remember at one point, like, I'm going to get Burger King. I went and got Burger King. Adam's home with the child. And I come back with this bag of Burger King, and I am just in full blown, crocodile tears, like hot mess, haven't showered, throwing the bag of Burger King down in the living room and saying, I can't do this. And my husband looking at me and telling me, like, then don't go get the formula.
Yeah.
And, us making that transition, but having all of that, like, oh my God, if I can't breastfeed, then I'm less than.
Yeah.
Or like, breast is best, or all of those crazy things that, while they're meant for education and to empower mothers, so often my experience, and I feel like several women's experience, is that it just breaks them down and further stigmatizes that you have to completely spend yourself to a point that's unreasonable so that your child gets what they need.
Well, I'm thinking about the risk factors for postpartum depression
Mhm.
and for you for postpartum PTSD. The biggest risk factors are inadequate sleep, um, improper nutrition, traumatic experience around the birthing process of going to the NICU,
Yeah.
and your you're sitting there with all of those. The great thing is you had the protective factors of a supportive partner and family.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think I would have thrown my Burger King on the floor too.
Yeah, it was, and like, thank God being met with the receptivity of my husband, like, "Just go get the formula. It's totally fine," you know? Um, and in that moment, that's exactly what I needed as I scarfed down my burger next. But so from there, we Briar continued to have issues. We went to the had several formula changes. She got diagnosed with silent acid reflux, and I'm a person who is a person of faith, and I value that in my life. And I will never forget the moment where, and Adam laughs at me for this now just because it's just part of our experience. But I was in the shower and I hit my knees in the shower and I completely spent. I mean, just spent. And I remember crying out to God and saying, God, heal my baby. Please just heal my baby. Because I knew something wasn't right. Something was not right. And so I think it was that night or the night before, I called the pediatrician at 2 in the morning and I said, something's off. Babies are supposed to know how to eat. It's like the only thing that they organically know how to do. Something's not okay. So the pediatrician tells us, hey, come in the next morning when I open, whatever. This is like the sixth time we've gone to the pediatrician in like 4 weeks, mind you. And Briar is lethargic at times. I remember there being pictures of her when she was really little, like we call them the pre-pictures that they're still hard for us to look at. Um, because as this story develops, you'll know that while our child was born on July 1st, we don't really felt like we met who she was supposed to, is today and became full of life until closer to about August 8th. Um, so we go to the pediatrician and pediatrician tells us, hey, don't like her lack of motivation to eat. Well, all right, well, neither do I, but whatever. So we're directed to go to Texas Children's Hospital in the Woodlands because it will be probably less hassle. And if you're familiar with the Texas Children's system in the Woodlands, it's nice and it was less hassle, but there is no intensive services there. Like if things are really really bad, so we go to this location. Well, we ask, do we need to take ambulance? And they tell us no. Go home, pack a bag, but make your way there. So,
And for people who don't know, the
uh-huh.
distance between where you live near Beaumont and the Woodlands is 2 hours.
Yeah, approximately.
hmm So this is not just like okay,
No,
we're going to send you to a bigger hospital. This
mm-mm.
is, you're going 2 hours away. And this is to like the step down hospital
Yeah, step down. Like,
when we look at the system comparatively.
mhm. Yeah. So we come home, we pack a bag, we tell our family, hey, this is what's happening. I remember calling my boss for my job that I still have now and the boss that I still have in my day job and saying, hey, this is happening. And my boss, who is also a person of faith, was very sweet to pray for us because we had no idea what was going on. And I look back on that moment and knowing that was like such a saving grace for me because I didn't know how much encouragement it gave us at the time. But I remember Adam basically trying to force feed Briar just so that she could have nutrition.
hmm
I mean, we're using syringes to feed our child at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I'm also pause because something the people listening don't know is that Adam is also a nurse. So you're a therapist, social worker, helper. Adam is a nurse. You're supposed to be coming into this equipped with all of this knowledge about how to handle things both medically and emotionally. And y'all
Mhm.
are trying everything that you can to do that.
Yeah. Not only is my husband a nurse, but he is a telemetry cardiac nurse,
Mhm.
which as this develops, you'll understand why that's so significant. Um, but so we come home, pack a bag, force feed our child, get in the car. At the time, we had a newer, older car because lifestyle. We had to get another car because we had a truck and looked like that's not conducive to parenthood. So, anywho,
Just throw the baby in the back. It's fine.
yeah, right. So, but I say that because now I never realized the connection between smells and trauma um, until you spend 2 hours in a car that kind of still had that new car different smell. Um, and after this experience was over and settled, I couldn't drive that car for a significant amount of time because it was just the height of that. So I'm driving the car. I'm flying to the Woodlands. I think we made it there probably in an hour and 15 minutes, which saved some time off.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Heck. Adam was like, I'll let you drive because you're going to push it more than I will. So I did. And so we get to the Woodlands, and Adam has to stay in the car because it's COVID. And so I bring our sweet 4 week old, almost 5 week old baby inside to the Woodlands. And they are like, "Why are you here?" I tell them, and then we go back. And then the nurse is doing her assessment, and she looks at me and she says, "I just want to let you know, I'm going to take your baby back, and there's going to be a lot of people." And me, having enough knowledge to be dangerous and highly emotional
Mhm.
in that moment, looks at her dead in the eye and says, "You're coding my baby. You're about to code my baby." And she's like, "Well, we try not to say it like that." And I'm just like, "Just get us back," like, look, whatever.
Whew.
So we go to the back, and there is 1,000 people. Briar's being hooked up to all these monitors. Um, in that exact moment, what I know now is that she was hypothermic and she was in cardiogenic shock, which is a really big cardiac term that I'm probably not going to do completely justice, but it means like you're in full blown like cardiac breakdown and arrest type.
Okay.
So, mind you, telemetry beautiful husband is in the car outside, and I am in the middle of the code team surrounding my child in the back of the Woodlands location.
And so he has no idea what's going on.
No. And then they page the only cardiologist that happened to be there at the Woodlands that day, Dr. Fatusin. Shout out to Dr. Fatusin if you hear this. First person to ever say like, "Hey, something's wrong with your baby, but we got it." Um, I don't even know if like her schedule, she was supposed to be there or anything, but she comes in and all the vitals are going crazy and whatnot. And she shows me this picture of a Taussag being anomaly. And
Can you
this,
explain what on earth that means?
yes. So Taussag being anomaly is where they're, in your heart, you're supposed to have one artery that goes to the left ventricle and one that goes to the right. Well, Briar's were upside down and flip flopped. So all of her oxygen and things was going to the right ventricle. So what that means for presentation is that she was having to choose between eating and breathing
Oof.
anytime she ate. So our daughter did not have a lack of motivation to eat, quite the opposite. Um, she had an inability to do both at the same time
Yeah.
because of an organic um, birth defect. Um, and now that we know it's a congenital heart defect at the time.
Yeah. And she's trying to survive the best that she can
Yes,
between breathing and eating.
which is the lethargic presentation. She was sweaty because anytime she ate, she was fighting, right? So she was like running a marathon to drink 2 ounces of breast milk or formula.
Yeah.
Um, so Dr. Fatusin is talking to me, and at this point, I have Adam on the phone. And I'm just like, I don't know enough about the cardiac world to know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, "So is she going to have a pacemaker?" And Dr. Fatusin says, "No, she's going to have open heart surgery." And, my husband hears this, and we're talking about this, and after the fact, I know that Adam was in the car talking to friends of ours and family. And Adam's not typically like a super chatty person, but like that feeling of helplessness, like we're so close, but we can't be together.
Ugh.
And it is the worst moment of our lives.
To find that news out and not even be able to be in the same room as your spouse.
Yes.
And for Adam to not even be able to be in the same room or same building as his child, who he so desperately wants to help.
Yeah. Well, and for me, like to understand, like I don't know what all these terms mean. I don't know what hindsight's 2020. I'm glad I didn't know what all the vital signs meant on the screen because I would have just been in probably complete panic.
Yeah.
I even remember Dr. Fatusin being like, "Why are you so calm right now?" And I told her, I said, "Well, I'm a social worker, and like I guess that's why." Like I just didn't even know how to answer that question.
Like
And
we're
now,
absurdly calm in crisis doesn't mean
yes,
it's gonna still be calm whenever
no.
it all stops.
And now I look back and I was like, "Oh, that was shock." Like that was shock. um So, if you know anything about the Texas Children's Hospital system, there's this beautiful thing called the Kangaroo Crew, which is like an intensive ICU in an ambulance box. And so we get transferred to the heart of the medical center for the cardiac ICU. And I, Adam and I are behind the vehicle because you also can't be inside that thing because it's COVID.
Mhm.
And we're behind them, calling parents, telling family what's going on, and we're heading to the medical center.
I don't know how either of you could drive.
Yeah, no, well, that
And it's
wasn't an
not a
option.
short it's not a short drive, it's an hour.
Yes, it's an hour. And we're in complete panic. We're very worried. We're in the probably worst emotional state we've ever experienced, either one of us. And and then we also have to make a decision of who's going to now do this next part with Briar. So I'm like, cardiac nurse, beautiful husband, it's time for you to tap in because I want someone that knows what the heck's going on, part of this next phase of whatever's going to happen. Right.
Mhm.
So we switch off. Um, then I go to a local hotel. Right. So at the Houston Medical Center, there's a Hilton hotel right around the corner, which is, hindsight, not the cheapest hotel you can get for to spend a month in the hotel.
Mhm.
Um, but that is the experience we had to juggle because neither one of us could be there at the same time.
Yeah, and
But
you can't be driving back and forth from Houston to Beaumont
no, no.
multiple times a day.
And as new parents, neither one of us were going to be that far away from our child in this experience.
Yeah.
So, um, Adam is there in the middle of the cardiac intensive care unit, and then I get a FaceTime call, probably not too long, maybe about 3 or 4 hours once everything kind of got settled as far as that respect's concerned. And the doctor says, I need you to know I'm probably going to have to intubate your baby. So Bar's intubated. Um, and then there's a doctor team assembled because at Texas Children's in the cardiac world, it's looking back, it's super cool and life saving. Um, that they say, okay, here's this cardiac case, and it's really complicated, and who wants it? Like who wants this case? And so there was this surgeon by the name of Dr. Imamura, and his team were the ones that were up for the task of completely reorganizing a heart that is essentially the shape and size of a strawberry.
Yeah, I'm trying to like figure out
Like
how
this big.
big her heart must have
Yeah.
been at that
Yeah.
moment.
Teeny, teeny tiny. Um, so she had her heart surgery on the 5th of August. Um, and I think ended up being a 17-hour surgery. So,
A
yeah,
17-hour surgery on a 5-week old.
yeah. Um, so as she's having this surgery, myself and my husband and our family are in the Hilton hotel room around the corner. Um, and the only moment that we got to have together during this whole experience was like the post surgery, when they come out and they say, like, this is how things went. Because Dr. Imamura demanded that we both got to hear that ourselves. Um, and, you know, they come out, and I remember him saying, well, it was a full repair. Um, and feeling relief, but also not knowing what that means necessarily. And then after the surgery, there's you spend more time in the hospital because you just had a 5 week old baby that had
Yeah, you're
some kind of
not going
pregnancy.
going home right
No,
afterwards.
no, especially to Beaumont, which is a little bit further. Um, and there was a few complications, but nothing without the realm of kind of normal during that time. Um, we continued to have feeding difficulties, because sometimes when you mess with the heart, there's nerves and stuff that literally tie directly to like even your vocal cords as a small child, which if you nick a certain part of the heart, it can impact your vocal cords.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Like things you don't know until you know them. Uh so we spend Adam and I spend that whole experience taking shifts one day at a time. So to be with Briar. Um, and we finally, probably I think halfway through, sorry, Texas Children's, but figured out how to kind of swindle the system. And if he would go off shift, when I went on shift, we can meet in the place where you eat at the medical center, and no
Mhm.
one caught us.
So it could be in the hospital at the same time.
Yes,
Not
yes. Which
even
was
in the room, just in the
no,
hospital.
in the hospital. In the hospital. So we could be like, okay, what happened last night? How did whatever, like, you know, literally like transfer of care, but between the parents.
Yeah.
Um, so this is where I remember there being this one experience where there was a complication and Briar's vitals weren't the best. And I was standing off to the side, just watching all of this happen. And one of the providers looked at me and said, Mom, you can be over here. Like, this is your child. And I look back on that moment now and I see how much the trauma impacted my initial attachment with Briar,
Mhm.
which that is not a comfortable thing, to be honest, to say out loud as a mom. Because, like, there's so much of that that's like, it's automatic. You're attached to your child. And it's like, yes, but there's this whole emotional realm of there's something really bad going on. And my brain and my emotions are telling me to protect myself from what might happen.
Yeah.
And then enters the attachment and how important attachment is for baby and mom in that very crucial period.
Yes, and you're just judging yourself even harsher for,
Yes.
well, I should be able to be completely attached to her. It doesn't matter that we have gone through this really unbelievable experience and have worried over and over and over if she was gonna make it.
Yeah. Yeah. So fast forward, it is like it's whenever hurricane, I think it was at Laura that came through in 2020, but it went closer to Lake Charles. That was like 2 days before we got discharged home with Briar. Um, and I remember telling, like,
Of course,
yeah,
there's a hurricane
there's a
also
hurricane.
involved
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this
Uh-huh.
wild, wild introduction to parenthood.
Yes, right. Like, of course. And now that I look back, I'm like, oh, that's where all that stress came. Oh my God.
Good night, Kayla.
Yeah. So they're like, oh, well, you might get discharged. And I looked at the nurse and the doctor and was like, hey, like, just saying, not sure if we're going to have a house in a couple days. So, like, you can slow roll this if we need to at this point. Like, I'm in no rush. Hurricane pivoted, did not hit our house. We never, I don't even think lost electricity, but Lake Charles, Louisiana got more brunt of the hurricane. Um, and so then we went home. We had a fence that was down, but we had a church group that came and fixed that for us, which was very kind and a blessing at the time. Um, so we're home with our sweet baby child, and she still has an NG tube in
Mhm.
because they're trying to get feeding where it needs to be before they allow her to just do it herself.
Yeah,
Um,
because when she's just had heart surgery and she's never been able to eat properly, it's not the time for her to also learn how to eat while her heart is
yeah,
healing.
absolutely. So then we navigate having to do NG tube replacement as parents. Um,
Hmm.
we had
What
home health.
things you never expect you
No,
will have to do.
which Adam has done NG tube placement and all the things as a nurse. I have not. We both had to do it before we left the hospital to know that we could do it. Um, but there was a point where Briar ripped it out. I'll never understand how she did because that time she was swaddled, and we still don't know how she ripped that out of her nose. Um, but she did, and Adam was trying to replace it. He's like, I can't. It's my kid. Can't do it. Not doing it. So we had to get the home health nurse to come replace it. Yes. Um, of course, it's your child.
Yeah.
At this point, she was a lot more spunky than our experience had been with her because she has a fully functioning heart. So she did not want that thing in her nose. Um, and so it's like, let's restrain our baby child, get the tube in, whole situation. Um, but this is where things kind of start happening in the trauma realm, I guess I would say, is
Hmm.
we're home and things are looking better, follow-up appointments are going well. And at this point, I got about 4 or 5 weeks left of maternity leave.
Hmm.
Okay. And I'm like, okay, we got to do all the things. We got to know how Briar has to do, what's her childcare going to look like with the ENG tube if it's still placed. So we're getting home health to teach our parents, all the things. And Adam's at a point where he's going back to work at this point because, somebody's got to work right now. Because,
Yeah.
yeah. And through this also, Adam had a foot procedure because his podiatrist said, like, oh, well, get it done while your wife's on maternity leave. That way, he didn't say this, but looking back, I could take care of Briar and my husband because he needed to have his like foot washed, whatever.
What in the misogyny?
Oh, it was
Like,
awful. Awful. I still say, like, if that doctor's name comes up in our house, I'm like, "Are you kidding me right now?" But it was also to be able to be on leave the same time because it was like a FMLA hack, if you
I mean, yeah, we could talk about how the
yeah.
US system contributes to that, but also, even if you had had none of this going on, to also have to have your husband have surgery while you are trying to heal
Oh, yeah.
from a, like a major medical experience,
Mhm.
but now your child is also having a major medical experience.
Yes. Thank God I didn't have a C-section.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So many
I
so many
just
things. Yes.
so COVID, NICU, congenital heart defect,
Mhm.
extended hospital stay, open heart surgery, husband foot surgery, being in 2 hours away from home at for a month at a time,
COVID
having
and
a
hurricane.
hurricane.
Mhm.
I mean, this sounds made up, right?
No,
Like if
like,
this were
this
a
is a
Lifetime
joke.
movie, someone just would say this has jumped the shark.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
I'm turned into the next one.
Yeah, no. That was the absolute experience. And it's not over. Wait, there's some more. So Adam goes back to work, and again, my husband is a great nurse and he's a telemetry nurse, which we just had this very significant cardiac experience with our daughter.
Mhm.
So enter uh, panic attacks on shifts because you're being triggered by the heart monitors because it's reminding you of a not far off experience. in which you thought your child was not going to be alive.
Yeah.
So at this point, Adam's still working night shift, and I'm trying to help him when he's navigating that experience for himself. Um, and finally, after a couple of these experiences, I tell him, like, hey, you're not well. You're not okay. And it's all right that you're not okay, but you got to get some help. So he gets some help and he's feeling better. Um, he's not having panic attacks like he was. Um, but I just remember having this empathy for Adam of like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that was going to be a thing for you. But of course it's a thing for you, right? Like you're there trying to take, and like his experience too. I remember Adam telling me vividly one time during COVID, like, I just don't want to see anybody else die.
Hmm.
Um, so like that's in the mix too, right?
Yeah, he's already dealing with healthcare professional COVID trauma
Yes.
and then personal trauma on top of that, and then having to go back to work still
Yeah.
in the middle of like deep COVID times.
Yep.
Um, Traumatized by his experience with his child almost dying.
Yeah. Yeah. So Adam gets help and he's feeling better. And I remember throughout the experience, we had this like Facebook page for people to have updates for Briar. And people telling us, like, y'all are just so matter of fact about things when you say it. And it was just kind of our way of dealing with things, honestly.
Hmm.
Um, it was easier for two helping professionals to regurgitate information to the world in the wild
Hmm.
than it was to try to process it ourselves in that moment.
Absolutely. And that's such a therapist thing to do,
Right.
is to be able to put on our professional hat and have some like objectiveness and distance whenever we're explaining something, and we know how to do that very well.
Yeah.
But when it's our own lives, we also have to feel it.
Yeah. So enters Kayla learning how to feel it.
Hmm.
Um, I Adam keeps finding me like crying in her bedroom. He's like, "Are you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." You know, the increased tearfulness, increased crying episodes. For me, probably an increased just like bitchiness and
Hmm.
not enjoying and being connected to the good like I knew I wanted to,
Hmm.
um, but I couldn't. So at this point, I'm back at work. Um, I don't think Burr has an NG tube anymore.
Hmm.
And I'm at work one day and I remember going to tell our administrative assistant, hey, I'm going to my PCP. I'm not well. I'll be back in a minute. So
Even just the like matter of factness of,
I
I have to go to the doctor. Goodbye.
call my
So no big
PCP
deal. Just feel like I'm
just
dying inside.
yes, 100%. Like literally that was my experience.
Hmm.
That is just I call it the Kayla way. That's the way I do things.
Hmm.
I'm not subtle really, but I try to just kind of take care of it. So call the PCP and I'm like, hey, can I get an appointment today? And they're like, well, no. Um, we can't get you in today. I'm like, well, I think I need to be in today.
Hmm.
And they're like, well, we're sorry. I was like, no, I don't think you understand. Like, I got to get in today. Like, I'm not well. And I kind of tell them how not well I am. And they're like, yeah, come in right now. Because I was not like, I'm about to take my life. But I was very much, it's, it's hard to live right now.
Yeah.
Um, so I go and the doctor I went and saw was my PCP at the time, is now someone who has given up their family practice and is a psychiatric resident because that's how much they care about wanting to take care of people like me and people
Hmm.
that are in psychiatric or mental health crisis. And they gave me this wonderful thing called Zoloft. And next thing that I know, able to make a therapy appointment to start processing what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel better and I am not bitchy and I'm a much better mom with therapy and Zoloft
Yeah.
than I really ever thought I could be, to be completely honest. Um, but that is my experience. That is our experience. And I just, there's so much to say. There's so much to unpack here. So I'm going to kind of throw the ball back to you, Kimberly, to
Yeah.
just start wherever you want this to go.
Well, all I'm thinking about in that moment is how much, especially as therapists, we can have judgment for ourselves
Yeah.
for needing to take psychiatric medication.
Yeah.
And the more that I have lived and the longer that I've been in this field, the best way that I've heard to describe it is sometimes we just need some chemical support to
Yeah.
be able to do the things that we need to do. And taking medication doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work. It doesn't mean that you're not trying hard enough.
No.
It means that sometimes what we have gone through or how our body is responding to something is so significant, it would be ludicrous to think that we could just manage that by ourselves.
Well, and for me, it was, I had to understand that trauma, depression, anxiety, significant life transitions
Yeah.
change your brain.
Yeah, they do change your brain.
They change your brain.
And so does becoming a parent change your brain.
Yes.
And so you went from being this like have it together, like we know what we want, what we need person expecting to have a normal entry into parenthood a- and being able to deal with that level of hard,
Mhm.
which can require its own chemical support because of how our bodies respond to things.
Yes.
But you also had PTSD on top of that
Yeah.
because of course you did.
Yes. Of course.
Um, and because we live in a system that does not allow us rest and respite, you had to be back at work and functioning and taking care of other people and managing therapists who are caring for people who are in psychiatric crisis, who every day is life and death.
Mhm.
What what was that like going back into that environment?
I'd like to tell you I remember a lot of it, but I don't.
Hmm.
um, it's probably a nice little mix of dissociation and
Fair.
depression.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm sure it was pretty on par with just going through the motions, doing what I need to do. Um, but also not giving myself the space to understand that that in itself is crazy and hard.
Hmm.
Like you mentioned, like every day is life and death. And here I am navigating or stuffing down rather my own life or death experience with my daughter
Yeah.
and trying to just be okay and not being okay.
Well, I think that the clients and patients that we serve very justly are coming into that experience wanting and needing somebody to be focused on their care and just I how unfair that can feel as a person
Mhm.
going, yeah, but you don't know what I am going through right now. Not that we're saying that to clients, but just living that experience every day and
Yeah,
wanting to be able to be really present for the people who are also in crisis around you, but you're in your own crisis.
100%.
And it doesn't feel fair. It
Mm-mm.
feels shitty that we don't get time and space to grieve and heal
Yeah.
before we have to immediately care for other people.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like you said earlier, like, what do you think you want people to know about their own birthing experience and whatnot? I want people to know, and helping professionals specifically, whether it's a therapist or a counselor or a firefighter or a nurse, that you already have an experience that lends yourself to PTSD
Hmm.
in anything. And you never know where the shoe's going to drop, so to speak, and it's
Yeah.
going to be, could be your turn. Um, so, you want somebody to have that safety plan of, what are we going to do when?
Hmm.
Well, what are you going to do when? Because I never entertained that it was going to be my experience.
Yeah.
Um, and then what it looks like and felt like for me. And then that experience was there and I had to deal with it. Or if I didn't deal with it, it was going to deal with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that we, life doesn't stop. The stuff in our life doesn't stop being hard, and the need to go to work and get our bills pay doesn't stop.
No, it doesn't. It does not.
Yeah. Which I'm imagining people listening and thinking like, well, yeah, that's when you need to take a leave of absence, you need to take time for yourself. And I just want to scream financial privilege at that thought.
Hmm.
um
Yep.
because
Because it's such a privilege. Such a privilege.
we don't all have that opportunity, and
No.
so many parents across the US and in other countries, but especially in the US where we have no real protection for parents, I, it's not an option. And
It's
so
not.
we have to figure out how to do the best we can with what we have,
Hmm.
um, which makes surviving these experiences even harder.
Yep. Yeah. You're already low on resources, and here you are trying to scramble those resources
Mhm.
to just be okay and pay the bills and do all the things. And
Mhm.
it's it's not always realistic.
No. So how did you survive it? Zoloft, therapy.
So love therapy, family support. I had a very supportive employer. I even had somebody that worked for me at the time who is now retired. I will not say their name. Were like, "Hey, I'll just pay your mortgage and you stay home." And I look back on that and being like, I cannot believe somebody did that for me. Like, but again, how privileged is that, right?
Mhm.
Like, how privileged for someone in my support system to say, I care about you enough to relieve some of this stress for you. But being intimately aware that that is not everybody's experience.
Yeah, it's not.
Um, but
But I think it's poignant that that is what it took for
yeah,
you to even be able to manage things as well as you could,
yeah,
was a really high level of support from
yes,
people around you emotionally, physically, and financially.
yes, absolutely. And we had a GoFundMe through this whole process. Like we didn't even talk about how like an expensive a month stay at a hotel was
Hmm.
in the medical center of Houston.
Hmm.
And we had a GoFundMe. I mean, the amount of social support that got us through that experience. Like, and still, that was not enough to shield us from postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and full blown PTSD.
Yeah. So how are you doing today?
Good. Um, Burr goes to the cardiologist now once a year. She's doing so good. She's in preschool. My husband is a case manager for one of our local hospital systems. Um, I figured it out enough to become what I say a real therapist. um,
To do outpatient clinical
yes,
work
to do outpatient clinical.
versus inpatient clinical management.
Sure.
Hmm.
Um, but I think one of the probably the best things of how I'm doing is able to have an experience and a resiliency in that experience, um, in my like back pocket, I guess you would say,
Hmm.
to help me connect with clients because their experience has the same nuances at times.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Um, just if whether it's consultations, whether it's sessions, like being able to normalize even just for a parent to say like, "Hey, being a parent is hard." Um, and if you feel like you're going crazy, it's all right because there's a certain level of that that's just par for the course.
Hmm.
And that allows you the ability to let yourself make space for that and talk about that because no one gave you a playbook on how to do this.
Yeah.
So when you're having trouble navigating it, I promise you I can give you some some very significant empathy
Yeah.
and um that you're not alone in that space.
Yeah.
And
Well, and even being able to be a person who has been through the unthinkable and
mhm,
been able to come out the other side,
mhm,
that there's so much hope in your story that w- people are resilient and can endure. In those moments, we don't want to hear that we're resilient.
no,
Um, but whenever we look in the long run, you can experience hard things, horrendous things, things you never thought you would survive, and you can come out the other side and have a good life. And
100%.
for our clients who are experiencing emotional or social distress, it's so helpful to be able to know that that is even possible.
Mhm, absolutely.
I how does it feel telling your story right now?
Um, I mean, a little scary, a little
Yeah.
nerve-wracking, but hopeful, right? Because the story didn't end at certain parts, it kept going.
Yeah.
Um, and it feels good to say it out loud so others can have an opportunity to hear it, um,
Hmm.
genuinely, but it feels, it's humbling too. Humbling is, I think, is a good word.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I'd like to think in 20 years, Burr listens to this podcast and is like, oh man, I might have had a near death experience, but it sounds like that experience almost did mom and dad in.
Sorry I did that to you, Mom.
Yeah, sorry. Like when we're in the throes of the teenage years, tell me like, hey, Kayla, listen to that podcast you did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, if you can survive a congenital heart defect and open
mhm,
heart surgery on your 5 week old, you can survive the teenage years, hopefully.
yeah, hopefully.
I don't know, I'm
To
only just beginning them, so that is to be determined.
um, yeah. So I guess that's how it feels.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I love that. And I so appreciate you being willing to share your story with us. And I think that beautiful things can come out of horrendous experiences. And that doesn't mean like, oh, it's okay that you had that experience because it's not. It's
Mhm.
not okay that you had to endure what you had to endure. And uh, I, my personal opinion is that your experience with Briar has only made you a more compassionate person, has helped
Mhm.
you to be able to mm, slow down and be more gentle with yourself. And that shows up greatly in your work with your clients because you can slow down and be gentle with yourself with your clients,
Mhm.
and you can be your wonderful, lovely, like mildly hard ass and gentle self with them too.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's a balance. It's a
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah, but you strike that balance beautifully, and I just want you to know that.
Well, thanks, Kimberly. Well, I'm thankful for an opportunity to tell our story, tell Briar's story. And my hope is that, it encourages other therapists, other helping professionals that, hey, it could happen to you. um, and if it does, when it does, uh, don't forget the resources that you so quickly give others,
Mhm.
um, and give yourself the grace to accept those yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for joining us today and listening to Kayla's story of challenge and resilience and hope. And we will see you again in another 2 weeks with another real story from a real life therapist.